When I walked into my own house after 5 days away, my family photos were gone. Why were there keypad locks on doors I'd never locked before? Why was my sister-in-law sitting at my dining table with a binder labeled property documents? Before I could ask another question, Alicia looked up, smiled, and said, "You should start packing, Vanessa. This is our house now." My brother Brandon wouldn't even meet my eyes. Then I spotted what looked like my own signature on a document I'd never seen before, and I realized this nightmare had started long before I walked through that front door. Before I tell you how my own family tried to convince me to leave the home I worked years to buy, let me know where you're watching from. Tell me your country and what time it is where you are right now. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about family justice and standing up for yourself, I'd love for you to subscribe and join me for the rest of this journey. 6 months earlier, if someone had told me my own brother would one day stand silently while his wife ordered me out of my own home, I would have laughed. Brandon wasn't perfect. He'd made plenty of bad financial decisions over the years, but I'd never believed he was capable of deliberately betraying me. Looking back now, I realize betrayal rarely arrives wearing a villain's face. More often, it comes dressed as someone asking for one small favor. I was finishing quarterly reports at the accounting firm where I'd worked for nearly 12 years when Brandon called. Seeing his name on my phone in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon immediately felt unusual. We usually exchanged birthday texts, holiday calls, and the occasional update about extended family. He wasn't someone who called just to chat. "Hey sis," he said, forcing a cheerful tone that sounded strained almost immediately. "You busy?" "I've got a deadline," I replied, leaning back in my office chair. "Everything okay?" There was a pause. "Not exactly." He explained that the construction company he'd started 5 years earlier had finally collapsed. Rising material costs delayed commercial projects, and 2 clients who failed to pay had pushed him deeper into debt than he'd admitted to anyone. The landlord had refused another extension, and he and Alicia had to leave their apartment by the weekend. "We already found another place," he said quickly. "We just can't move in yet. The lease starts in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? It sounded reasonable. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking me to co-sign a loan. He wasn't asking me to rescue his business. Just 2 weeks. "I hate asking," Brandon continued. "Honestly, I wouldn't if we had any other option." Before I answered, another voice came onto the line. "Vanessa," Alicia asked softly. She sounded embarrassed. "I told Brandon we shouldn't bother you." "You didn't bother me. I know you've worked incredibly hard for everything you have," she continued. "We're not expecting to be treated like guests. We'll stay out of your way, cook our own meals, and we'll be gone before you know it." She even laughed awkwardly. "I'll probably spend most of the time apartment shopping anyway." The conversation felt genuine. Nothing about it sounded rehearsed. When we ended the call, I stared through my office window toward the Charlotte skyline. My phone remained in my hand while another voice echoed inside my head, my mother's. "Promise me you'll always look after your brother." She had said those words countless times before she passed away 4 years earlier. Brandon had always been the one people worried about. He struggled in school. He changed careers repeatedly. He trusted the wrong business partners. Meanwhile, I became the dependable child. The one who earned scholarships, built a stable career as a CPA, paid off student loans, and eventually bought my own home without asking anyone for help. Somehow competence becomes its own burden inside certain families. People stop asking whether you're tired because they assume you'll always manage. That evening, I met my coworker and closest friend, Olivia Bennett, for dinner. She noticed something was bothering me before we'd even ordered. What happened?" I explained Brandon's situation. She listened quietly while stirring her iced tea. "So you're thinking about saying yes?" "I already know that tone. I said with a small smile. What tone? The one where you're about to tell me I'm making a mistake. Olivia sighed. I'm not saying don't help him. She leaned forward. I'm saying define exactly what helping looks like. I know. No, really, no. She pointed toward me. People don't usually destroy boundaries all at once. They move them 1 inch at a time. I laughed. You've been reading psychology books again. I've been watching what happens to generous people. Her words lingered longer than I admitted. The next morning I called Brandon. You can stay. The relief in his voice sounded almost overwhelming. Thank you. Seriously. You have no idea what this means. But there are conditions. Anything. We're putting everything in writing. Silence. Then he laughed. You mean like a contract? A temporary residency agreement. For family. For everyone. Another pause. Finally he said, sure. If he thought it was unnecessary, he didn't argue. That afternoon during my lunch break, I contacted a local notary recommended by one of our firm's attorneys. I wasn't trying to be cold or suspicious. I simply believed clear expectations protected relationships. The agreement was straightforward. Brandon and Alicia could stay for 14 days. They would pay no rent. Their stay would not establish tenancy. They would gain no ownership interest. The arrangement could not be extended without my written approval. Every page was simple enough that anyone could understand it. When they arrived that Saturday carrying suitcases, Brandon signed almost immediately. No problem, he said. Honestly, I appreciate you thinking this through. Alicia read every page more carefully. She wasn't looking confused. She looked analytical. Her eyes paused on nearly every paragraph before she finally signed. There, she said with a pleasant smile. Everyone's protected. That should have reassured me. Instead, something about the way she emphasized the word protected stayed with me. I ignored it. After all, she'd signed exactly the same document Brandon had. The first few days were surprisingly easy. They cleaned the kitchen after dinner. Brandon mowed my lawn without being asked. Alicia bought groceries and insisted on cooking twice that week. I caught myself thinking Olivia had worried for nothing. Then one evening, while I was organizing paperwork in my home office, Alicia leaned against the doorway. You've got such a beautiful filing system. I laughed. Occupational hazard. You accountants really keep everything. I try. She glanced toward the locked filing cabinet beside my desk. So, where do you usually keep the really important documents, house paperwork, insurance, stuff like that? The question caught me slightly off guard. In here, I answered casually, tapping the cabinet. Mostly digital backups these days. She smiled. Smart. Then she changed the subject so naturally that I barely remembered the conversation afterward. 3 days later, I came home from work and noticed a small stack of unopened envelopes sitting neatly on the kitchen counter. Utility bills, bank correspondence, a property tax notice. At first, I assumed Brandon had simply brought in the mail because he happened to check the mailbox first. Then I noticed something odd. The envelopes weren't in the random order the postal carrier usually delivered them. They had been carefully sorted. Government mail together, financial mail together, advertisements set aside. Someone hadn't just collected my mail. Someone had gone through it before deciding how to arrange it. I stood there staring at the stack for several seconds before hearing Alicia's cheerful voice from the living room. Oh, I hope you don't mind, she called. I figured I'd help organize everything while you were at work. She sounded completely harmless. Completely helpful. I smiled politely, but for the first time since they'd moved in, I carried every envelope into my office instead of opening them at the kitchen counter. Something inside me had become just a little more alert. By the third week, I stopped hearing the phrase 2 more weeks. Instead, I started hearing things like, "We're still waiting to hear back," or "The rental market is crazy right now." Every explanation sounded believable on its own. Together, they formed a pattern I didn't want to acknowledge. One Thursday evening, Brandon met me in the garage as I got home from work. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mind if we stay just a little longer?" "How much longer?" "Maybe another couple of weeks." "What happened to the apartment?" "The owner rented it to somebody else." "And the backup place? They raised the rent." I looked at him for a long moment. He seemed embarrassed, not defensive, just tired. I wanted to believe him. "You should have told me before today." "I know. I need a real timeline, Brandon." "We're working on it." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was enough for me to say yes one more time. Looking back, that was the moment I confused flexibility with healthy boundaries. The following weekend, I noticed something different as soon as I walked through the front door. A large decorative mirror had replaced one of my family photo collages. My grandmother's framed portrait was gone. "So," I called into the kitchen, "where are my pictures?" Alicia smiled as if I'd complimented her decorating. "I packed them carefully." "You packed them. They didn't really match the room." I stared at her. "They're family photos." "I know." She walked into the living room carrying a throw pillow. "I just wanted the house to feel more cohesive." House, not home, not your house, just the house. I forced myself to stay calm. "I'd appreciate it if you asked before changing things." "Oh," she blinked. "I thought you wouldn't mind." She apologized so quickly that confronting her further almost felt unreasonable. Later that night, I unpacked every photograph and placed them back exactly where they'd been. The next afternoon, 2 of them had been moved again. I didn't mention it. Instead, I quietly started noticing how many small decisions were no longer mine. The pantry shelves, the refrigerator, the living room, even the laundry schedule. Nothing dramatic, just tiny shifts that slowly made me feel like I was visiting someone else's routine inside my own house. Then the deliveries started. At first, it was a few online orders, a coffee maker, kitchen organizers, storage bins. Every package carried Brandon's name. Then larger boxes arrived. A desk, office supplies, bookshelves. One Saturday morning, I watched Brandon assembling furniture in what had always been my guest bedroom. "I thought that room was temporary," I said. "It is." He tightened another screw. "I just needed somewhere to work on job applications." The explanation sounded reasonable, until I noticed he'd mounted shelves directly into the wall, permanent shelves. "Aren't those anchored into the studs?" "Oh," he smiled. "I'll patch them later." Again, nothing big enough to justify a fight. Everything small enough to make me question whether I was overreacting. That was becoming Alicia's greatest strength. Every individual action seemed harmless. Together, they slowly erased my authority. A week later, I met one of my neighbors, Mrs. Ellis, while walking to my mailbox. She smiled warmly. "It's nice finally meeting your sister-in-law." I frowned. "You've met Alicia?" "Oh, yes." Mrs. Ellis laughed. "She's delightful." I smiled politely. "What have you two been talking about?" "Oh, neighborhood things." She waved her hand casually. "She mentioned you both own such a beautiful house." My smile froze. "We both own it." Mrs. Ellis immediately noticed my expression. "That's what she said." She looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry. Did I misunderstand?" "No." I forced another smile. "You didn't misunderstand." When I walked back inside, Alicia was watering plants near the kitchen window. "You've been telling people you're one of the homeowners?" She looked genuinely surprised. I didn't say that. Mrs. Ellis thinks you did. I probably said we own the house. She laughed. Oh, Vanessa. You know how people talk. No, Alicia. I kept my voice calm. I don't. It was just easier than explaining the family situation. The family situation is that you're staying here temporarily. Her smile faded for only a second. Of course. She spoke so gently that I almost questioned whether I'd imagined the entire conversation with my neighbor. Gaslighting isn't always loud. Sometimes it's delivered with perfect manners. Over the next 2 weeks, work became unusually demanding. Our firm was preparing several corporate audits before the end of the quarter. I was leaving before 7 every morning and often returning after 7 in the evening. The less I was home, the more comfortable Brandon and Alicia became. One evening, I heard laughter in the backyard. 3 neighbors were sitting around my patio table drinking iced tea. Alicia was introducing everyone. And when Brandon and I moved in, not stayed, not visited, moved in. I stood quietly inside the sliding glass door for several seconds before stepping outside. Everyone greeted me warmly. No one realized anything was wrong. Later, after our guests left, I asked Brandon if we could talk privately. I need you to help me understand something. Sure. Why are people getting the impression that this is your home? He sighed. I don't know. You don't know. Alicia's just trying to fit into the neighborhood. By pretending you own my house. He rubbed his forehead. I think you're reading too much into this. That sentence hurt more than I expected, because it sounded sincere, not manipulative. He honestly believed I was making an issue out of nothing, or maybe believing that was easier than admitting what was happening. A few days later, while checking my email during lunch, I noticed a message from our homeowners association. The subject line read, Community Emergency Contact Update. I opened it immediately. Dear Ms. Rhodes, per the recent information submitted, we have updated your property's secondary emergency contact. Below the message appeared a name. Brandon Rhodes. My stomach tightened. I had never authorized that change. When I called the HOA office, the administrator sounded confused. We received the update through the resident portal. I didn't submit anything. There wasn't any indication it wasn't authorized. Who submitted it? I'm sorry, Ms. Rhodes. I can't see that information from my screen. She apologized repeatedly and immediately removed Brandon's name after verifying my identity. Before hanging up, she added one sentence that stayed with me. We assumed he was another owner. That evening, I drove home in complete silence. For the first time since Brandon had arrived, I didn't feel guilty. I felt uneasy. Not because anyone had stolen my property, because someone seemed to be quietly creating the appearance that they belonged there. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an official-looking envelope wedged inside my mailbox. It was from the county tax office. Nothing about the outside looked unusual, but when I opened it inside my kitchen, one line immediately caught my attention. The correspondence referenced updated occupancy information connected to my property. Ownership was still listed under my name. Occupancy, however, suddenly looked very different. I stared at the page, realizing someone had been communicating with institutions I had never contacted, and I had no idea how many others might already believe the same story. I barely slept that night. The county notice sat on my kitchen counter long after midnight while I read it over and over, searching for something I'd missed. It didn't say my ownership had changed. It didn't suggest anyone else had legal rights to my home. What bothered me was something much subtler. Someone somewhere had been supplying information about my property that wasn't coming from me. As a CPA, I'd spent my career looking for inconsistencies. Fraud rarely began with a forged signature. It usually began with small pieces of false information that eventually created a believable story. The next morning, I called my manager and told her I'd be working remotely for the first half of the day. Then I drove straight to the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds office. The woman behind the counter introduced herself as Ms. Holloway. "What can I help you with today?" "I'd like to verify every document associated with my property." She smiled politely. "No problem." After checking my identification, she pulled up the property records. For nearly 15 minutes, we reviewed every filing connected to my address. Warranty deed, mortgage, property tax history, recording dates, parcel information, everything matched exactly what I expected. Only one owner's name appeared. Mine. Vanessa Rhodes. I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. "So nothing has changed." She shook her head. "No. No additional owners. No. No quitclaim deeds. No. No transfers. None." For a moment, I felt almost embarrassed. Maybe I had been overreacting. Maybe the HOA mistake really had been just that, a mistake. Before leaving, I asked one more question. If someone wanted to pretend they had ownership without actually changing county records, could they? Ms. Holloway leaned back in her chair. They couldn't legally change ownership without proper documentation. But people sometimes misrepresent their relationship to a property. What happens then? It depends where. She began counting examples on her fingers. Insurance companies, utility providers, delivery services, HOAs, financial institutions. They all collect occupancy information independently. So different organizations can end up believing different things. Exactly. She gave me a sympathetic smile. It creates confusion, but it doesn't create ownership. I thanked her and walked back to my car, feeling both relieved and unsettled. The law was still on my side. Reality, however, was becoming increasingly distorted. On the drive home, I decided to make a list. Every organization connected to my house. Insurance, electric company, water, gas, internet, mortgage servicer, HOA, property tax office. If someone had been spreading inaccurate information, I wanted to know how far it had gone. The first 2 phone calls were uneventful. My homeowner's insurance still listed only me. The electric company showed no unauthorized changes. Then I called the water department. After verifying my identity, the representative hesitated. "I do see another individual listed as someone authorized to discuss service." My grip tightened around the phone. "Who?" "Brandon Rhodes." "I never authorized that." "I'm sorry." The representative sounded genuinely surprised. "It appears the request came through our online customer portal. I don't even have an online account." There was a pause. "I recommend removing that authorization immediately." "I'd appreciate that." By lunchtime, Brandon's name had also appeared on my natural gas account. Not as an owner, not as someone financially responsible, simply as an authorized contact. Individually, none of these changes gave him legal rights. Collectively, they painted a picture. Someone was trying to establish that Brandon had long-term involvement with the property. That afternoon, I returned home earlier than usual. Brandon was outside trimming hedges. Hey, he said with an easy smile. "You got home early." "I've been making phone calls." He nodded. "Everything okay?" "I found out your name was added to my utility accounts." His smile disappeared. "Oh, did you do that?" He looked genuinely confused. "I don't remember." "You don't remember?" "I mean," he shrugged. "Maybe when I called because the water pressure was low. You called the utility company. You were at work." So you decided to represent yourself as someone authorized to manage my account. I wasn't trying to do anything wrong. You understand why that concerns me? He looked offended. I'm living here. As a guest. I know. His shoulders dropped. I honestly didn't think it mattered. For the first time, I believed him. Brandon wasn't thinking strategically. He simply kept saying yes whenever a form asked if he was a resident. The real question became, who had taught him to think that way? When I walked inside, Alicia was sitting at the kitchen island working on her laptop. "Everything okay?" she asked. "I've spent all morning correcting account information." She looked up. Oh, Brandon somehow became an authorized contact on multiple utilities. She laughed lightly. That actually makes sense. No, it doesn't. If you're gone all day, someone has to handle maintenance. I can handle maintenance. But you aren't always here. The conversation stayed calm, almost pleasant. That made it even more unsettling. Every sentence sounded practical, reasonable, helpful. Until I remembered one important fact. No one had asked my permission. That evening, I checked every drawer in my home office. Nothing appeared missing. Mortgage documents, insurance policies, tax returns, investment statements. Everything seemed untouched. Then I opened a folder containing documents from when I bought the house. Inside were copies of my driver's license, mortgage disclosures, settlement paperwork, and dozens of pages carrying my signature. The folder wasn't exactly where I'd left it. Maybe I'd moved it myself. Maybe not. For the first time in years, I couldn't trust my own memory inside my own house. The following morning, I stopped by my bank before work. I wasn't planning to do anything dramatic. I simply wanted to add additional authentication to every account connected to my mortgage. The banker helping me, a middle-aged man named Eric, reviewed my profile. As he updated my security settings, he glanced at his screen. Then he frowned. I'm sorry. For what? I just wanted to confirm. He turned the monitor slightly toward himself. You recently added another authorized household contact. No. I haven't added anyone. He clicked a few more screens. I don't see anyone officially authorized. Then why did you ask? He looked slightly embarrassed. There was an inquiry a few weeks ago. What kind of inquiry? Someone asked general questions about your mortgage servicing. Who? I'm afraid I can't disclose that. Could they get information? No. Not without verification. So nothing was released. Not that I can see. He paused. But whoever called knew your address, loan number, and enough identifying information that the representative initially believed they might be connected to the property. A cold feeling settled over me. Loan number. That wasn't public's information. It existed only inside my personal paperwork. I thanked Eric and walked slowly back to my car. For several minutes, I simply sat behind the steering wheel without starting the engine. Someone had been looking through documents inside my house. Maybe Brandon, maybe Alicia, maybe both. But guessing wasn't enough. Accountants don't accuse people based on instincts. We follow evidence. When I arrived home that evening, I didn't confront either of them. Instead, I went upstairs, closed my office door, and took out my phone. I began photographing every important document exactly where it sat. Every folder, every filing cabinet, every drawer. I created a spreadsheet listing dates, locations, account numbers, and anything that changed. Then I wrote one sentence at the top of the first page. Document first. Confront later. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would become the turning point that saved my home. The next Monday, I took an early lunch and drove across town to meet Daniel Brooks. His office sat inside a renovated brick building just a few blocks from the courthouse. There were no flashy advertisements in the lobby, no oversized conference room with polished marble tables. Everything about the place reflected the attorney himself, organized, understated, and practical. When his receptionist led me into his office, Daniel stood and shook my hand. "You brought quite a file." I looked down at the accordion folder in my arms and smiled nervously. I wasn't sure what mattered. The people who prepare too much documentation usually save me the most work. That was the first reassuring thing anyone had said to me in weeks. For nearly an hour, I walked him through everything. The temporary residency agreement, the changing stories about moving out, the utility accounts, the HOA emails, the county notice, the bank inquiry, the conversations that made me feel as though I was slowly becoming a guest inside my own house. Daniel listened without interrupting. He didn't react dramatically. He simply took notes. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair. "I'm going to tell you something that may surprise you." "What?" "I don't think they're trying to steal your deed." I blinked. "They're not—" "No." "Then what are they doing?" "They're building a story." I frowned. "A story?" He nodded. "In court facts matter." He tapped my folder. "But before people ever get to court, perception matters." He explained that manufactured occupancy disputes often relied on creating dozens of small pieces of supporting evidence. Not one forged document, not one dramatic act, hundreds of little details: mail, packages, neighbors, utility records, community groups, photos, social media, delivery history, maintenance requests. Each one appeared meaningless by itself. Together, they could be presented as proof that someone had been living there as more than a temporary guest. "They're trying to make temporary look permanent," Daniel said. "Exactly. And if I panic, you help them." That answer surprised me. I thought I should ask them to leave immediately. "You could." "But if they've already decided to fight, forcing the issue before you understand their strategy only accelerates the conflict." "So what do I do?" He smiled. "You become the most patient person in the room." I wasn't sure I liked that answer. Patience had already cost me 4 months. Daniel must have noticed the expression on my face. Patience isn't the same as doing nothing. He slid a legal pad towards me. "It means documenting faster than they're inventing." By the time I left his office, I had a detailed checklist: preserve every email, save every text, photograph every room weekly, back up all camera footage, change passwords, enable 2-factor authentication on every financial account, never argue over text, never threaten, never guess, never accuse without proof. Most importantly, don't let them know you're investigating. That evening, after Brandon and Alicia left for dinner with friends, I began making changes. My home already had exterior security cameras, but I upgraded the storage plan so every recording automatically uploaded to encrypted cloud storage, instead of remaining only on the local hub. I activated motion alerts for my home office. I changed every password connected to my smart home system. I enabled audio recording for common areas where state law allowed it, because I lived in a one-party consent jurisdiction. Daniel had carefully explained what was and wasn't legally permissible before I touched a single setting. Nothing I installed was hidden. The devices were already part of the home. I simply enabled features I had never bothered to use. Then I scanned every important document into secure digital storage. Mortgage records, insurance policies, property tax receipts, closing documents, the original temporary residency agreement, copies of my driver's license. Everything. When I finished, it was nearly midnight. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control instead of merely reacting. Over the next several days, I behaved exactly as Daniel instructed. I smiled. I ate dinner with Brandon and Alicia. I laughed at Brandon's jokes. I thanked Alicia when she cooked. If either of them noticed, I'd become more observant. They never mentioned it. In fact, Alicia seemed more relaxed than ever. She began acting as though the house already belonged to all of us. She ordered decorative baskets without asking. She replaced the welcome mat. She rearranged kitchen cabinets. One afternoon, I opened a drawer looking for measuring cups and couldn't find anything. "They're over here now," Alicia said cheerfully. She pointed to another cabinet. "I reorganized everything." I smiled politely. "Thanks." Inside, I was adding another line to my spreadsheet. Kitchen reorganized without permission, date, time, no confrontation. A week later, the motion alert on my phone buzzed while I was finishing an audit at work. Home office camera. My stomach tightened. I opened the live feed. The office door was open. No one was inside. A few minutes later, another notification appeared. Motion detected. This time, Alicia stepped into the room. She looked carefully down the hallway before walking toward my desk. I watched in silence. She didn't steal anything. She didn't force open drawers. Instead, she pulled out her phone. She opened my filing cabinet. One folder at a time. Mortgage documents, property tax statements, insurance paperwork. She wasn't reading them. She was photographing them, page after page, methodically, calmly. My hands became ice cold. I wanted to call immediately, to tell her to get out, to drive home. Instead, I remembered Daniel's words. Document first, confront later. I quietly downloaded the video, then another, nearly 12 minutes of footage. When I met Daniel the following morning, I placed my laptop on his desk. "I think you should watch this." Neither of us spoke while the recording played. When it ended, he closed the screen slowly. "Did she take anything?" I checked. "No." He nodded. "That's actually more interesting. Why, if someone intended simple theft, they'd remove documents." He folded his hands. "She wanted copies. So she wasn't looking for money. No. She was collecting information." Daniel reached for the folder containing my mortgage records. "Notice which documents she photographed." I looked again. Closing statement, loan information, insurance declarations, property tax history, settlement paperwork, every document connected to ownership. Nothing related to my retirement accounts. Nothing related to investments. Nothing related to cash. I hadn't noticed that pattern before. Daniel had. "She's creating a file." "What kind of file?" "The kind someone assembles before claiming a much deeper relationship with a property." A knot formed in my stomach. "So she planned this." "I believe she's preparing evidence." "Fake evidence." "Not entirely." He looked directly at me. "The strongest deception usually contains real documents arranged to support a false conclusion." I thought about every package, every neighbor, every utility account, every conversation. Each one looked harmless by itself. Together, they painted a picture. Daniel opened his notebook. "One more question. When exactly did they begin receiving mail at your address?" I gave him the approximate date. He made another note. Then he looked back at me. "Have you contacted your mortgage servicer since our last meeting?" "I increased security." "Good." He slid a printed document across his desk. "I requested publicly available servicing inquiry logs through the channels available to us." My eyes moved across the page. Several routine entries. Then one line stood out. Information request. Approximately 3 weeks earlier, someone had attempted to obtain details about my mortgage using identifying information connected to my account. The request had been denied because the caller failed security verification. No confidential information had been released. Still, someone had tried. Daniel tapped the page once. "They're not improvising anymore." I looked up. "What does that mean?" He answered quietly. It means they're building towards something. And for the first time since Brandon moved into my home, I realized this wasn't simply a family conflict that had gotten out of hand. It was a plan that had been growing piece by piece while I was still believing I was helping the people I loved. By the beginning of the 5th month, the atmosphere inside my house had changed in a way that was difficult to explain to anyone who hadn't lived through it. Nothing looked obviously wrong. There were no screaming matches, no broken furniture, no threats. If someone had walked through my front door for 15 minutes, they probably would have described us as a family getting through a difficult season together. That was exactly what made it so dangerous. Manipulation is hardest to recognize when it's wrapped in normal routines. Every evening we ate dinner together. Brandon grilled on weekends. Alicia asked about my day. We watched football on Sundays. From the outside, everything appeared peaceful. Inside, almost every conversation had begun revolving around one subject: the house. Not directly, never directly, always one step removed. One Tuesday evening, Brandon looked around the living room while we finished dinner. "You've really built a great life here." "Thanks. You've got more space than you even use." I smiled. "I worked pretty hard for it." "I know." He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking, here it comes," I thought. "What if someday we all invested in expanding the property?" I put down my fork. "What do you mean, like finishing the basement?" "There isn't a basement." He laughed awkwardly. "You know what I mean. A guest suite. An addition. Something that benefits everybody." Everybody. That word again. I kept my voice even. "There isn't an everybody when it comes to ownership." His smile faded. "I wasn't saying ownership." It sounded like it. Before Brandon could answer, Alicia joined the conversation. "I think Brandon just means families should build things together." "We already are." I stood to clear my plate. "I'm providing a place for you to stay." Silence settled over the table. No one argued. No one apologized. The conversation simply ended. Later that night, while loading the dishwasher, Brandon approached me alone. "I hope you didn't think I was asking for part of your house. Were you—" "No," he answered too quickly. He looked exhausted. "I hate feeling like we're guests." "You are guests." "I know. I don't mean that in a cruel way." "I know." He stared at the kitchen floor. "I've failed at a lot of things, Vanessa." "I know you've had setbacks." "It's more than setbacks." He rubbed both hands across his face. "I've got creditors calling every day." That was the first completely honest thing he'd admitted in months. "How bad is it?" "Worse than I told you." "Why didn't you say something?" "Because you'd worry." "I already worry." "I know." He looked genuinely ashamed. "I thought I could fix it." I wanted to ask how much debt he actually owed. Instead, I asked a different question. "Does Alicia know everything?" He hesitated. "I think so." Think, not know. That answer stayed with me. The next weekend, Alicia arrived home carrying paint samples. She spread them across my kitchen island as though we had scheduled a remodeling meeting. "What do you think?" I looked at the cards. Warm gray, soft white, deep blue. "For what?" "The upstairs hallway." I blinked. "I'm not repainting." "We're just looking." She smiled brightly. "I found a contractor who gives family discounts." "I don't need a contractor." "But eventually—" "There isn't an eventually." Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "You really don't like change." "I don't like people making plans for property that isn't theirs." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she laughed. "You always make everything sound so legal." "I work with contracts every day." "I know." She gathered the paint samples into a neat stack. "I just thought it would feel more like home." There it was again. Home. Not my home, not your home, just home. Daniel had warned me that language mattered. People often spoke their intentions long before they acted on them. From that day forward, I began paying even closer attention to the words people chose. A few evenings later, I was working upstairs when I realized I'd left my laptop charger in the living room. As I walked down the hallway, I heard voices drifting in from the kitchen, Brandon and Alicia. Neither knew I was home. I slowed instinctively. "I don't like this," Brandon said quietly. "You worry too much." "I'm serious." "She's starting to notice things." Alicia's voice remained calm. "She notices everything. She's an accountant." "Exactly. Then maybe we should leave." The room fell silent. When Alicia finally spoke again, her tone had changed. "No, we've come too far." My heart began pounding. I remained perfectly still. Brandon lowered his voice. "I don't want to fight her." "You won't have to." "Then what are we doing?" "We're establishing reality." Reality. I had heard Daniel use that exact word. Only now it sounded completely different. Brandon sighed. "I still don't understand." "You don't have to. You just have to stop acting like we're visitors." "But we are." "No. We live here." "That's what matters." I heard Brandon shift in his chair. "What if she asks us to leave?" Alicia answered without hesitation. "She won't." "How do you know?" "Because by then—" She paused. "She'll have to prove we don't belong." A chill ran through my body. I didn't hear another word. I quietly stepped backward into the hallway and returned upstairs before either of them realized I had been there. Once inside my office, I closed the door without making a sound. My hands were shaking, not from anger, from certainty. For months, I'd questioned my own instincts. Now, for the first time, I knew I wasn't imagining anything. Still, I forced myself not to react. Instead, I opened the smart home application Daniel had helped me configure. The kitchen ceiling speaker contained a built-in microphone designed for voice commands. The audio history feature had been activated weeks earlier. I searched the timeline, selected the correct timestamp, pressed play, every word, crystal clear, Brandon's uncertainty, Alicia's confidence. "We've come too far. We're establishing reality. She'll have to prove we don't belong." I listened twice, then a third time. Finally, I exported the recording into encrypted cloud storage. The file automatically generated a digital timestamp that couldn't easily be altered. The next morning, I met Daniel before work. I didn't say a word. I simply handed him my phone and pressed play. He listened without interrupting. When the recording ended, he remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he looked up. "This is important, because she admits they have a plan. More than that." He replayed one sentence. "She'll have to prove we don't belong." He paused the recording. "That's intent." "I don't understand." "People accidentally overstay. They accidentally receive mail. They accidentally become familiar with neighbors. They do not accidentally discuss building a future legal narrative." I sat back in my chair. "So now we confront them?" Daniel immediately shook his head. "No." "I have the recording." "I know." "Then why wait?" "Because they're not finished." His answer frustrated me. What else could they possibly do? He leaned forward. "Vanessa, people who spend months creating appearances usually expect a specific moment." "What moment?" "The moment they believe they've gathered enough evidence to force you into a defensive position. So we let them think they're succeeding. For now." I stared out his office window. Everything inside me wanted to end this immediately. Tell them to pack, change the locks, call the police, anything. Daniel seemed to read every thought crossing my face. Winning emotionally today could cost you legally tomorrow. I nodded reluctantly. I hate that you're right. I know. He smiled gently, but patience is almost over. As I gathered my folder to leave, my phone vibrated. A new text message. From Brandon. Can we talk tonight? Alicia has an idea about making the living arrangements more permanent. I think we should all sit down together. I read the message twice before looking back at Daniel. Neither of us said anything. We both understood the same thing. The conversation they'd been preparing for was finally about to happen. I stared at Brandon's text for nearly a minute before slipping my phone back into my purse. Daniel folded his hands across his desk. Don't answer yet. I was thinking the same thing. They've spent months building toward this conversation. So whatever they ask tonight is probably something they've rehearsed. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was reminding me not to walk into an emotional conversation without remembering everything that had happened before it. Before I left his office, he gave me one final piece of advice. Whatever happens, don't argue. I've spent 5 months biting my tongue. I know. But tonight they're going to want one of two things. What? Your agreement. He held up one finger. Or your anger. A second finger. If they don't get either one, they'll make mistakes. That sentence stayed with me all afternoon. When I arrived home after work, dinner was already on the table. Alicia had made baked chicken, roasted vegetables, and homemade rolls. It looked like a family celebration instead of what I suspected was a carefully planned negotiation. Brandon smiled when I walked in. Perfect timing. I smiled back. It smells great. No one mentioned the text, not while we ate, not while we cleared the dishes. Only after coffee was poured did Alicia look at Brandon. You want to start? He nodded slowly. Vanessa. His voice sounded nervous. We've been thinking a lot. I waited. You've helped us more than anyone ever has. I know you've both been through a difficult year. He nodded. We're finally getting back on our feet. That's good. But... He looked at Alicia before continuing. Moving again right now would set us back. There it was. Not a request to stay 2 more weeks. Not even another month. A larger conversation. Alicia leaned forward. We're wondering if maybe we could make this arrangement a little more stable. What does stable mean? She smiled politely. Longer term. How long? She didn't answer immediately. Brandon finally said it. Maybe a year. I kept my face perfectly calm. A year? It'll give us time to recover financially. I folded my hands together. You signed an agreement for 2 weeks. We know. And we're already 5 months beyond that. We know. So why would another year make sense? Neither of them answered. Instead, Alicia reached across the table and touched Brandon's arm. We're family. I almost smiled. For months, every difficult conversation eventually returned to that single word. Family. Not responsibility, not agreements, not respect. Just family. I love both of you, I said quietly, but family doesn't erase written agreements. Alicia's expression remained pleasant. No, it doesn't. But agreements can change. If everyone agrees. Exactly. And I don't. Silence filled the room. No shouting, no accusations, just silence. Finally, Brandon stood. I need some air. He walked outside onto the back patio. Alicia watched him leave before looking back at me. You know what this is really about, don't you? I'm listening. You've always been the successful one. I've been fortunate. You've been more than fortunate. She smiled sadly. You've had stability. I didn't respond. You own this beautiful house. You have a career. You have retirement savings. You have options. She lowered her voice. Brandon has none. I met her eyes. I didn't create his situation. No. But you could change it. By giving him my house. I didn't say that. You've been implying it for months. She leaned back. I think you're hearing what you expect to hear. Another carefully delivered sentence. Another attempt to make me question my own instincts. I simply stood. I've got work to finish. Neither of us mentioned the conversation again that evening. The next morning, something unexpected happened. My cousin Denise called. We weren't especially close, which made her opening question even stranger. Hey, she hesitated. I wanted to check on you. I'm okay. You sure? Why? Another pause. I heard things have gotten complicated. My stomach tightened. What things? I don't want to get in the middle. Denise, she sighed. Alicia said you've decided to throw them out. I closed my eyes. I haven't thrown anyone out. She said Brandon begged for more time and you refused. That's not true. I figured there were probably two sides. There are. But I wanted to hear yours. I thanked her for calling. After we hung up, I sat motionless at my desk. It had begun. The public version of the story. Over the next week, 3 more relatives contacted me. An aunt, a second cousin, even Brandon's godfather. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Concern, confusion, subtle disappointment. No one accused me directly. Instead, they asked questions that revealed what Alicia had already been telling them. That Brandon and Alicia had nowhere to go, that I wanted them out immediately, that I'd become obsessed with paperwork instead of compassion, that I was treating family like strangers. I answered every question calmly, never once criticizing Alicia, never mentioning the recordings, never discussing Daniel. I simply repeated the truth. They asked for 2 weeks. They've stayed nearly 6 months. I haven't asked them to leave. I'm asking them to honor what they originally promised. The conversations usually ended with silence, not because people suddenly agreed with me, because my version sounded very different from the one they'd already heard. Late Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a relative. It was Denise. Vanessa, I think you should see something. A screenshot followed, then another, then 6 more. They were images from a private family group chat I wasn't part of. Alicia had been posting updates for weeks. One message read, Vanessa keeps changing the rules. We're just trying to have stability. Another, she's acting like we're strangers after everything we've been through. Then another, we're documenting everything just in case she tries something. I slowly scrolled through dozens of messages. Some were sympathetic. Others encouraged Alicia to know her rights. One relative even wrote, if you've lived there that long, she probably can't just make you leave. Then I reached a message that made my heart stop. Alicia had written, don't worry, we've been careful. Everything is documented. Attached beneath the message was a photograph. My living room, taken months earlier. The timestamp showed it had been captured only 3 weeks after they moved in. Another photo. Brandon mowing my lawn. Another. Holiday decorations they had helped hang. Another. Boxes with their names on shipping labels. Not family memories. Evidence. Or what Alicia hoped would someday look like evidence. I immediately forwarded every screenshot to Daniel. Within 15 minutes, he called. How did you get these? A cousin. He was quiet for a moment. These help. They do. Very much. Why? Because they show planning. He paused. And one more thing. What? Notice the language. I reopened the screenshots. One message stood out now that he mentioned it. were documenting everything, not remembering, not sharing, documenting, as if they had been collecting pieces for a file from the very beginning. Daniel spoke again. I think Alicia believes she's almost ready. Ready for what? I don't know yet. But whatever she's planning, it's coming soon. Sunday afternoon, Brandon knocked gently on my office door. Can we talk for a minute? Sure. He stepped inside looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. I need to ask you something. What is it? He hesitated. Then he said quietly, Alicia talked to a lawyer. I kept my expression neutral. Oh, she says we have rights. I nodded once. What kind of rights? I don't really understand. He looked embarrassed. She says we've lived here long enough that things are different now. I studied his face carefully. He wasn't threatening me. He was looking for reassurance, as though he wanted me to tell him Alicia was wrong. Instead, I simply asked, Do you believe her? Brandon didn't answer. He looked toward the hallway where Alicia's footsteps echoed downstairs. Then he lowered his voice. I don't know what to believe anymore. That evening, I packed for a 5-day accounting conference in Atlanta. I told Brandon and Alicia I'd be leaving before sunrise. Alicia smiled warmly. Don't worry about anything. We'll take good care of the house. For the first time since they moved in, those words no longer sounded comforting. They sounded like a promise, one I wasn't sure I wanted them to keep. The accounting conference ended a day earlier than expected. One of the keynote speakers had canceled because of a medical emergency, and several afternoon workshops were condensed into the morning's schedule. By 3 o'clock Friday afternoon, I was already driving back toward Charlotte instead of checking into my hotel for one last night. I never told Brandon or Alicia my plans had changed. Part of me wanted to surprise them with dinner. Another part one. I hadn't admitted to myself until that moment, wanted to see how they behaved when they believed I wasn't coming home. The closer I got to my neighborhood, the quieter I became. I pulled into my driveway just after 6. 3 unfamiliar SUVs were parked along the curb. Not neighbors' vehicles, guests. I frowned. No one had mentioned visitors. As I walked toward my front door, I could hear voices inside. Laughter, glasses clinking, music. For a moment, I actually wondered if I'd come to the wrong address. Then I unlocked the front door. The conversation inside stopped almost instantly. Every face turned toward me. There were 6 people in my living room. Brandon, Alicia. 2 women I recognized from the neighborhood, a middle-aged man I'd never met, and another woman wearing a blazer carrying a leather portfolio. The air changed the second I stepped inside. Alicia stood first. Oh, she smiled too quickly. You're home early. I am. I slowly looked around the room. Am I interrupting something? No. She laughed softly. We were just having a conversation. One of the neighborhood women picked up her purse almost immediately. I think we should go. Within 30 seconds, everyone except Brandon, Alicia, and the woman with the portfolio had quietly left. The front door closed behind them. Silence settled over the room. Then I noticed it. Every framed photograph of my family had disappeared. Again. My bookshelf had been rearranged. The throw blankets I'd chosen years earlier had been replaced. Even the artwork hanging above the fireplace was different. It no longer looked like my living room. It looked staged, almost as though someone wanted photographs showing another family living there. I turned toward Alicia. What happened to my pictures? They're packed safely. I didn't ask you to pack them. You were away. I noticed. She folded her arms. We've been making the place feel more comfortable. The place, not your home. The place. Then my eyes landed on the dining table. A thick 3-ring binder rested in the center. A white label across the front read, "Property documents exactly as I had seen in my nightmares." I walked toward it. Alicia didn't try to stop me. In fact, she almost looked eager. "You should read it." Brandon finally spoke. "Alicia." His voice sounded strained.
"Maybe we should wait."
"No." She looked directly at me. "It's time." I opened the binder. The first section contained photographs, boxes addressed to Brandon, holiday decorations, some mail, utility correspondence, family dinners, neighbors gathered in the backyard, months of carefully selected images. The next section contained printed emails, HOA correspondence, maintenance requests, utility account information, community newsletters, everything arranged chronologically, every page designed to tell one story: that Brandon and Alicia had become permanent members of the household. Then I reached a page that made my pulse quicken. There it was, my signature. At least, something that looked remarkably like my signature. Beneath it sat language I'd never seen before. I read only the first few lines before looking up. "I never signed this." Alicia remained perfectly calm. "You did." "No." "You probably don't remember." "I remember every legal document I've ever signed." She tilted her head sympathetically. "You sign paperwork all day. This isn't mine. It looks exactly like yours. It resembles mine." "That's different." Brandon shifted uneasily. "Alicia!" She ignored him. Then she said the sentence I'd heard in the hook of this story. "You should probably start packing Vanessa." She spoke almost gently. "This house isn't really yours anymore." I stared at her. "I'm sorry. We've established residency." She smiled as though explaining something obvious. "We've invested in this home. We've maintained it. We've built relationships here. We've received mail here. We've made improvements." She lightly tapped the binder. "And we've documented everything." I couldn't help noticing her choice of words. The exact same phrase from the family group chat. "We've documented everything," for months. She genuinely believed the binder proved something. I slowly closed it. "Alicia, I've listened to you. I've been patient. I've opened my home to both of you." "But you're mistaken." "No." She smiled. "I've done my homework." "So have I." For the first time all evening, her confidence flickered. Only slightly. She recovered almost immediately. "My attorney says you've created rights whether you intended to or not." I looked toward the woman with the leather portfolio. "Are you her attorney?" The woman blinked. "Oh. No. I'm a mediator. I was asked to observe a family discussion." She looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I wasn't aware there was disagreement over ownership." Alicia's smile disappeared. The mediator slowly stood. "I think I should leave." "I agree," I said. She collected her papers and walked out without another word. The room became very quiet. Brandon looked like he wanted to disappear. I reached into my purse. Not for anger, not for threats, for my phone. I sent a single text. "I'm home. They're ready." Daniel replied less than 30 seconds later. "On my way." Alicia noticed the message. "Calling a lawyer isn't going to change facts." "I agree." I sat down across from her. "Facts matter." She smiled confidently. "So let's discuss facts." "We have." "No." I folded my hands calmly. "You've discussed appearances." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you've mistaken documentation for ownership." She laughed. "We'll see." 20 minutes later, Daniel Brooks knocked on my front door. He entered carrying one slim leather briefcase. Nothing more. No dramatic entrance, no raised voice. He simply introduced himself. "Good evening. I'm Daniel Brooks. I represent Vanessa Rhodes. Alicia leaned back confidently. Perfect. She pushed the binder across the table. I've already organized everything. Daniel smiled politely. I'm sure you have. He didn't even open it. Instead, he placed his own folder on the table. Much thinner, much simpler. He removed one document. The original notarized temporary residency agreement. Signed by all three of us. Then another. Certified county ownership records. Then another. Mortgage servicing inquiry logs. Then another. Utility correction requests. Then another. Cloud-authenticated security camera stills showing Alicia photographing confidential ownership documents inside my office. For the first time since I'd walked through the front door, Alicia stopped smiling. Daniel calmly placed a small digital speaker on the table. He pressed play. The kitchen conversation filled the room. We've come too far. We're establishing reality. She'll have to prove we don't belong. The recording ended. No one spoke. Brandon slowly turned toward his wife. You told me... His voice cracked. You said this was just about finding stability. Alicia didn't answer. Daniel spoke instead. We also have screenshots of family group messages discussing the creation of documentation to support a future legal claim. Brandon looked at Alicia again. You told everyone I promised to stay here forever. Still no answer. The confidence that had carried Alicia through the evening vanished in front of me. Not because I had argued louder, not because I had embarrassed her, because every carefully constructed appearance collapsed under one thing she hadn't expected. A complete timeline. She suddenly stood. I'm not listening to this. She reached for the binder. Daniel calmly rested his hand on it. I wouldn't recommend removing potential evidence. Her face turned pale. I want both of you to leave, I said quietly. Brandon nodded almost immediately. Alicia didn't. Instead, she folded her arms. I'm not going anywhere. Daniel looked at me. Then he said the words we'd been preparing for over the past 2 months. Vanessa! It's time to begin the legal removal process. The police officers arrived 25 minutes later. Neither of them stormed through the front door or treated the situation like a television drama. They listened. That was all. One officer spoke with me and Daniel in the living room, while the other interviewed Brandon and Alicia separately in the kitchen. I handed over copies of the temporary residency agreement, the county property records, and the timeline Daniel and I had assembled over the previous 2 months. The officers looked through everything carefully. One of them finally asked Alicia a simple question. Ma'am, is your name on the deed? No. Have you ever purchased this property? No. Do you have a lease? She hesitated. No. Did you originally move in as a temporary guest? Another pause. Yes. The officer nodded. Then this appears to be a civil matter regarding possession, not ownership. Alicia immediately protested. We've established residency. The officer remained calm. Possibly. But residency doesn't automatically create ownership. She tried again. We've lived here for months. I understand. That still doesn't transfer title. He wasn't taking sides. He was explaining the law. Because Brandon and Alicia had been living in the home for several months, the officers couldn't simply remove them that evening. Daniel had already warned me that this might happen. Instead, we began the formal legal process the following morning. Ironically, I wasn't disappointed. I had spent months preparing. Another few weeks wasn't going to change the evidence. If anything, it would ensure every step happened correctly. Daniel smiled as we walked out of the courthouse after filing the necessary paperwork. You know why I wanted patience. I think I do now. If we'd rushed 6 weeks ago, this would have become a story about emotions. He tapped the folder under his arm. Now it's about facts. The hearing was scheduled less than a month later. During those weeks, Brandon barely spoke. He left early every morning looking for work and returned late in the evening. Alicia became noticeably quieter. She stopped rearranging furniture, stopped inviting neighbors over, stopped speaking about future renovations. For the first time since moving in, she behaved like a temporary guest again. But the damage had already been done. I spent most evenings in my office reviewing documents with Daniel. Every photograph, every email, every utility record, every screenshot Denise had forwarded, every audio recording. We weren't trying to overwhelm the court. We were building one clear timeline. When the hearing finally arrived, I felt surprisingly calm. The courtroom was much smaller than I'd imagined. No dramatic speeches, no television moments. Just a judge, 2 attorneys, a clerk, and 4 people whose lives had become tangled because kindness had slowly been mistaken for obligation. Alicia had hired an attorney after all. He argued that Brandon and Alicia had established long-term residency and had reasonably relied upon my continued permission to remain. He pointed to utility records, mail, neighborhood involvement, photographs, community participation, exactly as Daniel had predicted months earlier. Then Daniel stood. He didn't attack Alicia. He didn't accuse anyone of being evil. Instead, he walked through the timeline one document at a time. First came the notarized temporary residency agreement. 14 days. No tenancy, no ownership, no financial interest. Signed voluntarily by everyone. Then he presented emails showing that no written extension had ever been approved. Next came the security footage. The judge watched quietly as Alicia entered my office while I was at work. She wasn't stealing jewelry. She wasn't taking cash. She was photographing ownership documents. Daniel then introduced the audio recording. The courtroom became silent. We've come too far. We're establishing reality. She'll have to prove we don't belong. No one needed Daniel to explain those words. They explained themselves. Finally, he introduced the screenshots from the family group chat. One message appeared on the courtroom monitor. We're documenting everything. Another. She keeps changing the rules. Another. Don't worry, we've been careful. Daniel turned toward the judge. These statements were made weeks before any legal disagreement existed. They demonstrate preparation, not misunderstanding. Alicia's attorney objected. The judge overruled him. The evidence remained. Then something happened I hadn't expected. The judge looked directly at Brandon. Mr. Rhodes? Yes, Your Honor. I have one question. When you moved into your sister's home, what was your understanding? Brandon swallowed. His eyes drifted toward Alicia, then toward me, finally back to the judge. 2 weeks. The courtroom became completely still. And later, I kept hoping she'd change her mind. Did she ever promise you ownership? No! Did she ever promise you permanent housing? No. Were you aware of the written agreement? Yes. You signed it? Yes. The judge nodded. Thank you. That was it. No dramatic confession. No emotional breakdown. Just the truth. For the first time in months. After a short recess, the judge returned with his decision. Ownership remained solely with me. The court found no evidence of any transfer of title. No evidence of any promise of permanent ownership. No evidence that my hospitality had created the legal rights Alicia claimed. Instead, the judge noted a documented pattern of attempts to create misleading appearances through selective documentation and unauthorized interactions with organizations connected to the property. The request to remain in the home was denied. The court granted lawful possession back to me without ambiguity. As we walked into the hallway afterward, Brandon caught up with me. Vanessa. I stopped. For a moment, neither of us knew what to say. Finally, he spoke. I'm sorry. His voice sounded older than I remembered. I should have stopped this months ago. I looked at him quietly. I kept telling myself Alicia knew what she was doing. He shook his head. I wanted to believe things would somehow work out. They don't work out by themselves. I know. His eyes filled with tears. I kept choosing the easier conversation. I nodded slowly. And eventually, the easier conversation became the harder consequence. He gave a sad smile. You always were the smart one. I almost laughed. This wasn't about being smarter. It was about paying attention. He looked down at the courthouse floor. I don't expect you to forgive me. I already have. His head lifted in surprise. But forgiveness isn't the same thing as trust. He nodded before I even finished. I understand. No, I said gently. I think now you finally do. As Brandon walked away toward the parking lot, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was sad. Not because I'd lost my house. I hadn't. Because somewhere between asking for 2 weeks and standing inside a courtroom, my brother had forgotten the difference between accepting kindness and expecting entitlement. And once that line disappears, families can lose far more than property. They can lose each other. The house felt strangely quiet after Brandon and Alicia finally moved out. Not peaceful. Not yet. Just quiet. For nearly 6 months, I'd become so accustomed to hearing other people's footsteps, conversations, and opinions filling every room that the silence almost felt unfamiliar. The morning after they left, I stood in the middle of my living room holding a cup of coffee. Nothing had changed overnight. The walls were still the same color. The hardwood floors still creaked in the same places. Sunlight still poured through the front windows exactly as it always had. Yet somehow the house felt different. It finally felt like it belonged to me again. I didn't celebrate. I didn't open a bottle of champagne or invite friends over. Instead, I spent the weekend doing something much smaller. I unpacked every family photograph Alicia had boxed away. One by one, I returned them to the walls. My grandparents, my mother, pictures from college, the day I bought the house, the framed photo of me standing in front of the closing attorney's office with a ridiculous grin because I'd never imagined someone like me, a girl who had grown up sharing bedrooms and stretching every dollar would someday own a home outright. When I hung that picture back in the hallway, I realized why its disappearance had hurt so much. It wasn't just decoration. It reminded me who had built this life. Not luck. Not inheritance. Years of disciplined choices. Monday morning, I called a locksmith. Not because Brandon still had keys. He had already returned every copy. I changed the locks anyway. The keypad codes, the garage entry, the alarm passwords, the smart home administrator settings. Every access point. The locksmith noticed how thorough my list was. Recent move? He asked casually. I smiled. No, just a fresh start. He nodded as though he'd heard that answer before. Before leaving, he handed me every newly programmed key. Only give these to people who respect your boundaries. He probably meant it as a joke. Still, the words stayed with me. The following week, Daniel helped me complete one final round of paperwork. We added additional identity protections to my property records, extra authentication for mortgage servicing, updated emergency contacts, enhanced fraud alerts through the county whenever legally available. As we finished signing the last document, Daniel closed the folder and smiled. I hope I don't see you professionally again. I hope so too, he laughed. That's usually the nicest compliment a lawyer can receive. Before I left, I thanked him. For what? You never told me to become less generous. He looked thoughtful. Because generosity wasn't the problem. What was... You believed protecting relationships required sacrificing boundaries. He paused. Those are two different things. That sentence stayed with me longer than any legal advice he'd given. A month later, Olivia convinced me to host a small dinner. Nothing elaborate, just 4 friends. Good food, music, people who never once made me feel guilty for saying no. At one point, someone commented on how comfortable the house felt. Without thinking, I answered, "It finally reflects the people who are actually invited." Everyone laughed. Only I understood how much healing was hidden inside that simple sentence. Several weeks after that, I received a handwritten letter. Not a text, not an email, a letter. The return address came from Raleigh. Brandon. I sat at my kitchen table before opening it. The handwriting looked hurried. He wrote that he had found steady work supervising construction projects for another company. The salary wasn't spectacular, but it was enough to rent a small apartment. He admitted he had spent years confusing help with dependents. He also admitted something I hadn't expected. After the court hearing, he had learned that Alicia had been speaking with multiple people about finding a way to secure permanent housing long before they ever moved into my home. Some conversations had happened months before they asked for those original 2 weeks. Brandon wrote that discovering those messages had ended their marriage, not because Alicia wanted the house, but because he finally accepted how many times he had chosen silence over honesty. The letter ended with one sentence. "You saved the house, but I had to lose almost everything before I understood what you were trying to protect." I folded the letter carefully. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious. Mostly, I felt hopeful. People can change, but they usually don't change because someone rescues them. They change when they finally accept responsibility for themselves. I wrote Brandon back a week later. My letter wasn't long. I told him I was glad he had found work. I wished him peace. I told him I genuinely hoped he rebuilt his life. I also told him something I wanted him to understand completely. I wasn't inviting anyone to move back into my house. Not now. Not someday. Not if another emergency happened. That boundary wasn't punishment. It was protection. For both of us. He replied a few weeks later with only 3 sentences. "I understand. I won't ask again." Thank you for answering. That became the beginning of a different relationship. One built on honesty instead of obligation. Months passed. Life settled into ordinary rhythms again. Work, friends, Saturday mornings in the garden, quiet evenings reading on the back patio. The house no longer reminded me of betrayal every time I walked through the front door. It reminded me of resilience. One afternoon, while reorganizing my home office, I found the original notarized temporary residency agreement. For a moment, I considered shredding it. Instead, I bought a simple black frame. Not because I wanted to relive the experience. Not because I wanted a trophy. Because I wanted a reminder. The document now hangs on one wall inside my office. Visitors sometimes ask why I'd frame something so ordinary. I usually smile and tell them it reminds me of the most important financial lesson I never learned in business school. Kindness is strongest when it's protected by clear boundaries. Without boundaries, kindness slowly becomes expectation. Expectation becomes entitlement. And entitlement can quietly destroy relationships that generosity alone could never save. Today, when I unlock my front door after a long day at work, I no longer wonder whether I'll find someone rearranging my life while I was gone. I know exactly what waits for me. My photographs, my choices, my peace, and perhaps the greatest victory wasn't keeping my house. It was finally letting go of the belief that loving my family required sacrificing myself. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for the people you love is refuse to make their responsibilities your own. That lesson cost me 6 difficult months, but it gave me something far more valuable: A home that finally felt safe again because the strongest lock I installed was the one around my own boundaries. When I look back on everything that happened, I don't think this story is really about a house. The house simply became the place where a much deeper lesson unfolded. Many of us are raised to believe that love means saying yes, that being a good daughter, sister, or brother means carrying burdens that were never ours to carry. But healthy love and unlimited access are not the same thing. If you've ever been made to feel guilty for protecting your finances, your home, your time, or your peace, I hope you remember this setting boundaries is not an act of revenge. It's an act of self-respect. Forgiveness can free your heart from bitterness, but forgiveness does not require restoring the same level of access to someone who repeatedly violated your trust. Those are two very different decisions. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let people experience the natural consequences of their own choices while we continue building a life rooted in honesty, responsibility, and peace. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you loved? How did it change your relationship? Share your experience in the comments. If stories like this resonate with you, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and joined our community. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection. While the emotions and situations may feel familiar, the characters and events are products of creative storytelling intended to encourage thoughtful conversations about family boundaries, accountability, justice, and healing.